Do you care to share a thumbnail sketch of where the value lay? Oh, don't tell me you're all shy types. We'll even put you on camera if you do. Yes?
It was interesting to think back on what your first experience of death and dying was. I had never done that before.
Thank you. Could you hear the comment? It was interesting to reflect upon, perhaps for the first time in some time, what was your first experience about death, or what sticks in your mind about that experience? Did you find a lot of commonality or diversity in terms of your peers' life experiences?
Diversity.
Great diversity. What's the significance of that?
We bring all of who we are into our therapy when we're with other people. So I was just, some of the stories were like, wow. But you know, part of what came up for us too is, you know, not only the family we're born into and the rules, roles, and relationships around how you deal with any dynamic, especially death, that's pretty intense, but the culture, the environment you grow up in, as far as like I grew up in a very, very small farm town where she grew up in the city and everybody else had different places they experienced their first death experience. So it's not just the family piece, but it's also where you grow up and how it's dealt with.
Did everybody hear those comments? Very insightful. The death experience is not just what we were exposed to in terms of the fact of someone's death. It's multi-layered. What was the nature of the relationship? What was the context? What was your cultural upbringing? Was it rural, urban? Your ethnic background? What were your life lessons about how to deal with death? Was it kept in a closet and not articulated, or was there communal grieving? All has a big impact, or had a big impact on all of you, I suspect. Shapes you. Yes?
I'll share. We were talking about at our table, I don't know if you guys all heard in the news, but Deb and I work for Jeffco Schools Employee Assistance Program. So we had an employee death last Friday. It was a school bus driver who got hit on the freeway and died pretty instantly. And so we responded on Friday and Monday, and they're a pretty tight group. You know, the bus drivers, they're up in the mountains near Evergreen. And so it was hard on our executive director because the bus drivers kind of trickled in because the weather was so bad that day. And so he had to tell, you know, like 65 people about that. Which was really, you know, it was really tough, but, you know, we all managed it pretty well. And the community response within the school district has been really good, because everybody always says, oh, we're Jeffco, we're family. Well, you know, as you probably know on the news, we've been through some tough things. Our superintendent resigned, we have a new school board, but the community response, you know, one of the schools made them lunch one day, and lots of people are going to the funeral, and they've gotten cards and flowers, and they just really have pulled together. So it's been, you know, I mean, as far as death goes, it's been really positive how everybody's responded and worked together.
And what lessons or takeaways for you from that, and how can you bring it into a therapeutic relationship?
Well, for us, I mean, we're seeing and working with some of the individuals who are most highly impacted, obviously. And we continue to outreach and support the group and individuals. And, you know, we're going to go to the funeral. Usually we don't, but we're going to do that just because we think that's important. So, you know, we'll continue to build off of that.
Let me ask you this. What was the result of your conversations about the connector between your own life experiences with death and dying when you're then put into a role for an intervention with a family whose issues may be death, may be collateral issues, the process of dying, decline, dementia, part of the same continuum? I'm really curious from your therapeutic standpoint. Yes?
So what's one of my conversations I brought up to our group is, you know, when you work in the alcohol and drug culture, what I was saying is typically by the time people get to our facility, life's been pretty out of control and deteriorating fast. Criteria to even get in would warrant that things need to be pretty bad. So what we're seeing, especially 18 to 26-year-old young heroin adults, and opiates, like they're dying in droves from overdoses. Before they get to treatment, or they'll come to treatment, and then because the system of the family hasn't been willing to all work together, they'll get through treatment, get out, and then they'll overdose after they get out. So what we've been talking about is how to culturally, in the last 2 years, it's been overwhelming for treatment centers nationally. Everybody's kind of the buzz talking about what are we going to do to help these families. So we've just all decided the direct way is the way to go. And so we sit families down and just say, if we don't all look at the dynamic going on in this family system, there's a high probability that this young adult is not going to make it in this culture. And because so many have died and others have been friends with those that have died, I mean, it's just such a direct conversation about the life and death of what needs to be looked at, what the end result's probably going to be if A, B, C, and D isn't addressed. And it just becomes a big part of the emphasis of the treatment value. Now, what I was chuckling about a little bit with them is the little town I grew up in the Midwest was about 800 people, and the culture is very Catholic, German, Irish community. So the way that everybody learned to deal with death is it's very out there, the grieving's very open in the community. Everybody attends every funeral because everybody knows everybody or is related to them. And so the way that I learned, which makes my role in the substance abuse part, as far as bringing myself into that, is, you know, you go, there's a viewing, everybody has a viewing at the same funeral home, and it's the same routine of the whole Catholic Mass and the whole thing that you do around that. And then afterwards, the ritual is everybody meets in a community center and just has at it drinking. So part of that expression is tears at the casket, and then you get blasted with booze at the community center after. And both are expressions of that whole process of the loss.
Thank you for sharing. That's really interesting. My personal takeaway from that is that our barriers about dealing effectively with death are ageless, even though my experience and perspective is from the aging side of the equation. You shared a very clear-cut issue of how when you're dealing with younger age groups with drugs and alcohol, isn't there another dance of denial? Maybe part sense of immortality, a part is the fact that death has never been dealt with directly. It's theoretical. It's hard to conceptualize that as a risk for them. Well, that denial permeates our entire culture, regardless of age. And certainly when you're older, but we can't afford to do that because there's 75 million boomers right now. Our 85 and up population is growing 3 times at the speed of our population. And not being a numbers guy, this number haunts me. Ken Dykewald, the founder of AgeWave out of California and the preeminent age-wave theorist in the United States, has done multiple studies over the years. I have several of them with me today. He found early on, and this statistic has stayed pretty static, 67% of families do not have the talk. I'm talking about a wide range of discussion, otherwise known as legacy planning, and I'll get into that in more detail. That's mind-boggling. 2/3 of families don't sit down and really talk through their visions for the future, how to pass along wisdom as well as wealth. So is there little wonder you end up in a situation where so many decisions are made by default? After money, long-term care is the biggest concern based on his studies. Lastly, we have a disconnect. 2/3 of seniors will need long-term care, yet they deny it. They think it's the person next door who will need long-term care. We were all convinced years ago to buy disability insurance, yet we think we don't need long-term care insurance. Transfer of wealth and wisdom. When I talk about legacy planning, you're talking about transfer of real property, transfer, obviously, of liquid assets. You're also talking about transfer of personal property, of meaning to you. But legacy planning is also something broader. How do the generations pass along their values, their wisdom, what they want for their kids? They're tied together. And then lastly, their instructions and wishes. You could have a beautiful 3-ring notebook with the best living trust documents and wills done by your attorney, but more often than not, they've been gathering dust, sitting on a shelf. You think you've taken care of your legacy planning. We went to see the lawyer. That was 7, 8 years ago. But have you had a discussion with your kids or your grandkids about your instructions related to that? And that's why we can often be misled about some simplicity. You go to a number of websites, there'll be canned definitions about different powers of attorney and how to use them. And that's of some value, but I'd be wasting your time if I sat up here, in my opinion, and started just spouting out definitions of different powers of attorney. Why? Because in real life, it's an area of grays. You may have a power of attorney, but did you think through with your lawyer who you should give that power of attorney to? Who was the attorney in fact? Was it a knee-jerk decision? Did you just give it to the kid who lived the closest, or the one who had the educational background that seemed to fit? Those are logical criteria. They might be irrelevant in your situation. So if you didn't process that seemingly simple issue, who do I give the authority to act in my stead if I lack the capacity, could have a dramatic impact on when the time comes to actually use that power of attorney. The sad reality of denial is decisions by default. And in the senior care field, this is the commonality. And it's terribly frightening. And decisions by default happen in an emergency. They're often ill-advised, they're knee-jerk. Well, you know stress-based decisions and how well they typically work out. I've seen it time and time again. So my invitation to you is, how can you help from a process standpoint families avoid decisions by default? And to me, that's a process issue. Your challenge is to engage the employee who comes to you, or to get engagement from the employees who are avoiding coming to you, to start thinking through some of these issues well in advance. And where do you start? You start by talking. There's no good antidote to that. There's no way around it. Put down the cell phones. Don't text about it. Ideally, don't email about it. Phone calls are better. In-person conversations. So what I'd like for you to do is gather for a few minutes and talk about how can you engage your clientele to engage. What have you been doing in your organization to get families talking about aging issues, care options, what to do with all the what ifs. What if the kids come home at Thanksgiving and suddenly dad, who seemed forgetful, is far past just forgetting. Serious forgetfulness, not forgetting where the keys are, it's forgetting what the keys are for. I wasn't exaggerating when I was talking about driving through the garage or setting a house on fire. The holiday times obviously are pivotal in this area. So I'd like for you to take a few minutes and just talk about how well or not so well you or your organization have been engaging employees to initiate conversations and deal with these issues. Why don't you just take